Man, you guys are looking good. You're here today, first real weekend of summer, and you made it. Come on, everybody, just nudge your neighbor, tell them you made it. Come on, you made it. So glad that you are here today. Awesome to be able to worship together with our Life family, and then all those that are joining us online, thank you so much for joining us. Maybe some of you are on vacation, but you're watching online. We're so glad you're with it. We miss you. Can't wait until you are here again today. And all those that are new, man, we're so glad that you are becoming a part of the LifeGate family. If I haven't met you yet, I would love to meet you, so be sure and stop by before you leave today. And I'm super excited about this series that we started last week called Family Tree. So everybody say Family Tree. Family Tree. And in this series, what we're talking about is how do we grow some fruit on our family tree. Now, I know some of you are saying, I already got some fruits in my family tree, but that's not what I'm talking about. Actually, what we're talking about is we are talking about the fruit of the Spirit. How do we make sure that the fruit of the Spirit is growing in our life, on our tree, and how do we make sure that we are reproducing it in our family, to our children, that our family tree is filled with the fruit of the Spirit? Because here's the deal. In fact, this is kind of bottom line for this whole series is I don't want my fruit, or I don't want my tree to be bare, right? Like, I don't want no ugly old limbs that are just kind of standing out there with no leaves, no fruit, man. I want my tree to be fruitful. I want it to be growing. I want it to be producing. In fact, it kind of reminds me of my house back in February. Come on, how many remember what happened back in February? Come on, we had the ice apocalypse. Remember that? When that happened, and we had these bushes in front of our house that had been there since we moved there. We lived there like 11 years now, and so they started out small and they had grown a little bit bigger, and they were starting to kind of get ugly and kind of were a pain, to trim or whatever. Well, ice apocalypse came and took care of all that, right? Because, man, those suckers died. How many lost something during the ice? Like, you lost some bushes or something like that. And I'm telling you, like, it was good news, bad news. I mean, bad news was we lost our bushes. Good news is no more trimming the hedges. Come on, you know what I'm saying? And I started thinking about that, man. In life, I mean, in landscaping, it's okay if your trees die. But how many know in life, you don't want your bushes to die? Come on, you want your tree to be filled with fruit. And here's the deal, man. In my children and in my family, like in my heritage, I want to pass down the fruit of the Spirit. In fact, that's what we've been talking about in this series. We kind of got a key passage that's kind of leading us through the series. It's found in Galatians chapter 5. So if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn there to verse number 22. And this passage is actually a very famous passage of Scripture. It's actually known as the fruit of the Spirit. So everybody say fruit of the Spirit. Oh, you guys are going to have to do better than that. Come on, fruit of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit is found in Galatians chapter 5 and verse number 22. In fact, what I want to do is I'm going to wake everybody up a little bit, and we're going to read this aloud together. Now, not a soft, aloud, okay? We're going to have to open our mouths and read it out. Galatians chapter 5, 22. I'm going to count to 3, then we're going to read it together. 1, 2, 3. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Come on, give yourselves a hand. You did a good job there, yeah. And here's the deal. Here's what Paul is saying. Paul is saying, hey, when the Spirit of God is working in my life, then I'm going to bear fruit. Like, if I have the Spirit of God living inside of me, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to bear some love and some joy and some peace and some patience and some kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. These things are going to grow on the tree of my life. They're going to be produced in all that I do. And here's what we've discovered in this series is that it doesn't just apply to our life. It also applies to our family. It also applies to our relationships. In fact, in this series, we're talking a little bit about the nuclear family. We're going to talk a little bit about the church family. We're going to talk about some other family relationships. And here's really the main point, and that is this, that when the Spirit of God is truly living inside of us, then here's what happens is that our tree will grow these fruits, that in my marriage, there's going to be love, and there's going to be joy, there's There's going to be peace and patience. In my relationships with my children and in my home, I'm going to bear kindness and goodness and gentleness and faithfulness. And in the church, like all of these things are going to flow in my relationships when the Spirit of God is working in my life. I can't help but bear this fruit. And so what we've decided to do is just take each one at a time. In fact, we discovered last week, didn't we, that it's not the fruits of the Spirit, although there are 9 of them. It's actually the fruit of the Spirit, that all of them are one fruit, and yet they all produce kind of different flavors, all right, of the same fruit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Last week, we talked about love and how do we make sure that love is the foundation of our family, of our relationships. How do we make sure that I'm producing love in every way? And that was, I'm telling you, a foundational message for this whole series. If you missed last week, I would encourage you to go back and watch it on YouTube or listen to the podcast, and it's a good one. But today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the second flavor of the fruit of the Spirit and how do we make sure we're producing it in our family. And so we're going to talk about joy. Everybody say joy. Come on, say it with a smile on your face. Come on, joy, joy, joy. Now, let me ask you here today, how many of you have noticed that in the last year and a half or so, how many of you, raise your hand, have noticed that it's harder to maintain the fruit of joy in your life than it's been in previous years? Come on, right? I mean, there has been a lot. Come on. All the stuff that has happened since March of 2020, all of the circumstances make it a little bit difficult to maintain your joy. And you think about some of the things that happened, like back in, March, we shut everything down. And then suddenly think about how this affects your family, because suddenly now everybody's at home together. And moms and dads, you're used to taking your kid to school and the teacher dealing with them for a good portion of the day. But now you're not taking them to school and you're not going to work. You're doing your work on Zoom and they're doing their school on Zoom. And we all know how that really worked, right? And you've got all of these things happen. And then there's all the response to all the COVID stuff. And some people agree, some people don't. And then there's all the conflict that happens with that. And then you get on Facebook or you watch the news. And I mean, all this stuff just kind of crushes down on the fruit of joy in your life. And you're like, I'm trying to maintain my joy. I'm trying to keep it there. But man, all these circumstances. And then just on top of that, you've got the daily regular stresses of life and of your family and your relationships and all this kind of stuff. It's been more difficult in this last year and a half to maintain joy in your life than ever before. And it affects our relationships. It affects our family. It affects our relationships with our spouse and with our children. And so what I want to do is just talk about this for a minute. Like, how can we make sure that our homes are a place of joy? How can we make sure that we are producing this fruit of the Spirit in our families and in our lives? And here's what I know. We have discovered this over this last year and a half, but these were all things that were happening even before that there are some things that are literally joy killers in your life. Kind of like Icepocalypse killed my bushes. There are some things that every single time will kill the joy in your life and in your family. So I just want to give you 3 joy killers. If you're taking notes, you can write them down. The first one is this. The first thing, I know that almost every time this happens, it just tends to zap the joy right out of my life and my family, and that is this: conflict. Everybody say conflict. How many of you have noticed that when you have conflict with somebody, like when you have a relational stress with someone, when you know that there's someone that's mad at you, or you know that you're frustrated with someone, come on, how many know when that is happening, it's hard to think about anything else? It's easy to be stressed. It's easy to be filled with anxiety. Like, it's hard to get your mind off of that to do. It zaps the joy right out of you. And how many know it's multiplied by like 100 when it's someone that you love? When it's someone that you're close to, when it's someone that you live in the same house with or sleep in the same bed with. Come on, you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's easy to kind of get over it when someone's mad at you or you're mad at someone that you don't really know. I mean, some jerk cuts you off in traffic and you're mad for a second, but then you're over it, right? But man, when it's your wife or when it's your children or when it's your family, or when it's people that you have relationship in church with, and there's this relational conflict that's happening there, come on, what happens is it tends to zap all of the joy right out of you. In fact, David talked about this in the Psalms. Look what he says in Psalm 55 and verse number 12. He says, if it were an enemy who were insulting me, I could endure it. What does he say? He's saying, if it's somebody that I don't like, or somebody that I don't know, that I'm not getting along with, hey, I can get over that. If a foe were rising against me, hey, I could just hide from that. But look what he says in verse 13. He says, but it is what? It is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship at the house of God as we walked among the worshipers. David goes, man, if it was just somebody that I didn't know or like or wasn't very close to, that I had conflict with, like I can leave that at work. I can leave that at school. I can get over that. But when it's somebody that's in my life, like when it's a friend, when it's somebody I went to church with, when it's somebody that I have relationship, when it's a family member, man, it just zaps all of the joy right out of me. Some of you are experiencing that. In fact, that's where your joy went, is that you've got conflict in your marriage that's unresolved. Or you got issues with your children that need to be resolved, and until they are, while that conflict is there, let me just tell you something, it's going to be a struggle to maintain your joy. Some of you have people in church that you need to forgive, or you need to restore a relationship, and until you do, while that conflict is there, there's going to be a lack of joy. It's going to be difficult to grow joy on your tree or on your family tree. Some of you, let's just be real, some of us, like it's not like the conflict that I have with someone else, it's the conflict that other people have and I'm sucked into it. Come on, right? Ever experienced that before? Like you go to the family gathering, 4th of July, right? All the family together, and you know there's those two family members that don't get along, and the whole time you're there, everyone's on pins and needles, wondering what's going to happen, and it sucks like all the life and the joy and all the stuff just, come on, is that just my family, or have y'all experienced that before, right? Or maybe it's like, you're a kid at home and mom and dad can't get along. And while mom and dad can't get along, man, it makes it hard for you to have much joy in your life too. Or maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's your kids that are grown and they're not in good relationship with, and while they're like that, then it's hard for you to have joy too. In fact, Paul talked about this in the book of Philippians chapter 2 and verse 1. Listen to what he says. He says, is there any encouragement from belonging to Christ? Any comfort from his love? Any fellowship together in the Spirit? Are your hearts tender and compassionate? Then make me truly what? Make me truly happy. How? By agreeing wholeheartedly with each other, loving one another, and working together with one mind and one purpose. Paul's talking to the church of Philippi, and he's going, you guys are stressing me out because you can't get along with one another. If you would get along with one another, it'd make me really happy. Some of you parents in the house know exactly what Paul was talking about, because you're like, man, I don't even care if you like each other, but if you love your mom, you will get along with one another. Come on, how many moms in the house know what I'm saying? And here's the thing, is as long as there's conflict in your home, it's going to be hard to have true joy. Here's another one, not just conflict that kills our joy, but the second one in the home that kills our joy is criticism. Everybody say criticism. Now, help me out today. Raise your hand. How many of you know somebody in your life that is one of those, I call them critical Charlie. Come on, anybody know a critical Charlie that's just like always criticizing? Some of you are like, it's not a male, it's a female, so we'll call her Negative Nancy. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe we just have Debbie Downer, and it's just like every time you get around, some of you are like, I hate it when he has us raise our hand like that. Well, if that's you, you're probably the one that's critical Charlie, right? I'm just saying. But we all have people like that, don't we? Like you get together at the family gathering, and there's always like that uncle or whatever that's just like, oh, did you gain some weight? Come on, you know what I'm saying? I don't like the way you're raising your kids or what you're doing with your life. Or maybe some of you, your critical Charlie and Negative Nancy is your spouse. You live with him. Every time you get around, it's like, you're not doing the dishes right. Oh, you're not folding those towels right. And I wish you would get a better job or whatever. And it's like, man, it's frustrating. It zaps the joy out of you. Some of you, it's your parents. Every time you're around your parents, they're like, well, when I was your age, I had 4 jobs and I was paying all my own bills. What's wrong with you? I mean, when we were growing up, we went to school uphill both ways in the snow with no shoes on. Come on, what's the matter with you, right? And what happens in the family? This creates a culture in the family. It's a toxic one. And it zaps all the joy from inside of our family and from our life when we're constantly critical of one another. In fact, check out what the Proverbs say about it. In Proverbs 27 and verse 15, I like the way it reads in the Message. What it says, a nagging spouse is like a drip, drip, drip of a leaky faucet. You can't turn it off. You can't get away from it. Wow. Why do you think sometimes we don't have much joy in our families and in our homes? Maybe it's because we got some nagging spouses, or some nagging parents, or some nagging uncles, or some nagging people in our lives that are like drip, 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 leaky faucet. I wish I could turn it off, but I can't get away from it. And what does it do? Man, it destroys our joy. In fact, look what Paul says about it in Galatians chapter 5. He says, for the whole law is summed up by this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you are always biting and devouring one another, watch out. Beware of what? Of destroying one another. That's some harsh language right there that Paul's using. But you know what is true? Moms and dads, we actually have the potential to destroy our children by the words that we say. Remember we said it last week that life and death are in the power of the tongue. We can either build our children up or we can tear them down with the words that we are constantly speaking to them and over them. We have an opportunity to either build the culture of our home or to destroy the culture of our home with the words that we speak. And it's not just what we say, but how we say them. And what robs our family from joy so many times is this critical attitude. When there's conflict, when there's criticism, it robs the joy. It kills the joy from the leaves or from the branches of our tree. Notice the third one, and that was this. This is a huge one. What kills our joy? Overcommitting. Everybody say overcommitting. How many know that we live in a culture that is overcommitted? Like, you just look at your schedule. You look at all the things that you got to do and all the places that you got to go. I mean, it's endless. We're crowded, and we got all of these commitments, all these things to do. We got work commitment, we got school commitment, and we got, the kids are in sports, and the kids are in dance, and then, there's not just one sports team, but there's school team, and then there's select team, and then there's travel team, and then there's club team, and then there's, under 12 team, and of course we got to be at the under 12 team because that's where the scouts are going to be, and my 12-year-old's going to get a scholarship to college. If I don't have them there, they're not going to get their scholarship. And there's all these places and things and all this stuff that we think are so important. And then on top of that, we add on all the stresses of life, and the yard's got to get mowed, and the dishes need to be done, and all the things that we are over-committed to in our lives. And what happens? When your schedule's crowded and your life is over-committed, you get tired. And when you get tired, when you're exhausted, how many know that your emotions are unstable when you're exhausted? Come on, anybody ever been tired before? And then when you're tired, what do? You might not mean to, but you end up snapping at the kids. And it wasn't even anything they did. It's just, man, I'm worn out. Or something happens, somebody asks a question, you overreact to it. And then later, you're like, Mom, why did I do that? And why was it? Tired. Some people, here's what they do, is they just walk around kind of numb all the time. No joy, no emotion at all. Because I got to get from here to there, to there, to there. All the things that I've got to do. In fact, it reminds me of the story of Elijah in the Old Testament. Elijah was a man of God. God used him in great ways. Called fire down from heaven. And yet if you read the story, you see that Elijah went from place to place to place to place. It was hundreds of miles that he traveled. His schedule was overcrowded. And after traveling all these miles, doing the work of the ministry, he came to a place where he was exhausted. And he got some bad news. And when he got that bad news, he overreacted to it. And the Bible says he went, he sat down underneath a tree, and he asked the Lord to kill him. He had suicidal thoughts. Why? Because he had all this stuff going on. Or think about Moses. Remember the story of Moses? How he was a great leader that God used in incredible ways. And yet you think about all these hundreds of thousands of people that he is leading, and pretty critical, complaining people that'll zap the joy right out of you as well. And it comes to a place where they need some water, and God says, I want you to speak to the rock. But in anger for all the people, he strikes the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And where did that come from? Where did that depression come from in Elijah? Where did that anger come from in Moses? Where does this lack of joy come from in so many of us? It comes from these lives that are overcrowded and overcommitted. Joy killers, criticism, conflict, overcommitted. So you say, well, Pastor, how do I get this joy back? Like, if I've lost it, if there's no joy growing on my spiritual tree, on my family tree, what do I do? Well, let me just help you out today. I want to give you 3 fertilizers that will help you to grow some joy in your family. If you're taking notes, you can write them down. And the first one is this: if you really want the joy back, you've got to make your home a safe place. Everybody say safe place. You got to make your home a safe place. Guess what, moms and dads? Let me talk to you for just a minute here today. Your home ought to be the safest place for your children. It ought to be a place that when they come home, they know they are loved, they are accepted. It should be a place that's free from constant conflict and constant criticism. It should be a place where your kids can be free to be themselves. And guess what? Let's talk about marriage as well. It ought to be a place where your spouse is able to be himself or herself, where they're not afraid of constant negative talk or emotions or relationships. It ought to be a place that is free from drama. It ought to be our safe haven. And let me say it like this, moms and dads. If you will make your home a safe place, your children won't be in such a hurry to leave it. But if their home is filled with constant conflict, constant drama, then guess what? As soon as they're old enough, they're going to want to leave. And after they leave, they're not going to want to come back. And they're not going to want to bring the grandkids back either. See, we have an opportunity to build an environment, to build the culture of our home with the words that we say, with the attitudes that we have. If you will make your home a place where your children and where family is celebrated, then they won't have to go out into the world and look for people to celebrate them. They'll want to be at home. And instead of going to all their friends' house all the time, they'll want to bring their friends to your house because it's a safe place. So what could happen if we decided to make our home a drama-free zone? What if we decided we're going to make our home a criticism-free zone? It's going to be a place where people, where our spouse and where our children feel like they are free to be themselves. If they feel like they are loved unconditionally. Remember we talked about that last week? That's our job as parents, is to show unconditional love that says, hey, even if you don't always get it right, even if you mess up sometimes, even if you don't perform, like in this house, you are loved no matter what. No criticism. Now, let me balance this out for just a minute. Just because it is a criticism-free zone doesn't mean that it is a correction-free zone. And there's a difference, right? Come on, as parents, our job is not to criticize our children and to tear them down, but it is to lead them, to correct them, to coach them, to guide them. The Proverbs say it like this: to raise up a child in the way that they should go, and in the end they would not depart from it. Come on, that's our job. And here's the difference. There's a difference between criticism and correction. There is a difference between criticism and coaching. In fact, let me tell you what it is. Criticism is destructive. It tears down, but correction is instructive and constructive. It builds up. In fact, check it out like this. Criticism, oh, this is so good, is motivated by making the person who is giving it feel better. But correction and coaching is motivated by helping the person who hears it become better. Let that sink in for just a minute. When we're criticizing, you know what the motivation behind it is? I want to feel better about myself. So I'll criticize my child or my spouse or my pastor or the government or whatever. That's what it's motivated by. Correction and coaching, you know what it's motivated by? Not making me feel better, but helping the person that I am giving it to become better. And man, isn't this the job of parents? Isn't this the job of spouses? In fact, look what the Bible says in 2 Timothy chapter 2. Paul says, and a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone, a good teacher and patient. The Lord's servant must, look at these words, must gently teach those who disagree. Then maybe God will let them change their minds so that they can accept the truth. Wow, did you hear that? It's not talking about necessarily just parents, but man, I would say this could describe what it looks like to be a parent. Because how many know, especially as your kids get a little older, there are going to be things that you disagree on. There might be things that they're trying to figure out and things that the culture's trying to tell them. And it gets frustrating trying to get them to agree with what you want them to agree with. But here's what Paul says. Hey, our job is to be a good teacher and to be patient and to be gentle with those who disagree instead of just coming down on them for the times when they don't get it or they don't understand or they don't disagree. Instead, we gently and lovingly guide them and help them. And when we do that, what does it say? It says, perhaps then the Lord might work in their heart and they may change their minds. Wow. What could happen if we created this kind of culture in our homes? What could happen if we became a safe place? Number 2, how do we grow this fruit of joy on our family tree? Here's the fertilizer. We got to make home a safe place, but secondly, we got to lead our family with a sustainable pace. You got to have a sustainable pace. Think about it. How many parents have ever seen the movie Cars? You ever seen that before, right? I like, Lightning McQueen, ka-chow, we have a son, he's 5, he loves cars. And I was thinking about that. In fact, a few years ago on our At the Movies series, we talked about Lightning McQueen, and we talked about that scene in Cars where he's trying to win the race, and he's done several laps, and now it comes time for the pit stop. And so because he wants to win the race, he decides, I'm not going in for a pit stop, everybody else does. And so he skips the pit stop and he goes around the lap a couple of more times, and he's getting almost to the end, about to win the race. And right before he crosses over the finish line, you might remember what happens. His tires, explode, and he runs out of gas, and he comes to a screeching halt just moments before crossing the finish line and winning the race. And I was thinking about that scene, and I was thinking, that's the way a lot of families are. That's the way a lot of parents are. And we got to keep going. We got all these things to do. No time for a pit stop. No time to stop and refill. No time to have those moments that refill our tank so that we can win. No. We got to win because we got to take the kids to this and that and do all of these things to win the race. And parents and families are burning out. And even if they don't burn out or run out of gas, there's no joy in all the stuff that they're doing. We got to learn to slow down. We got to learn to prioritize our commitments. And yes, it is good to be committed to some things, but are they the right things? Are they the things that are sustaining you? Are they the things that are filling your tank? Or have you skipped out on the things like being at church and spending time with your family and reading the Bible and coming to prayer, and those things that would refill you, have those things been overcrowded and crowded out of your life by all the other things that you put into your schedule? Sometimes we got to take a pit stop. In fact, write this down if you're taking notes. Some of the greatest memories happen in the margins. The greatest memories, you know where they happen? In those times when there are margins. In fact, raise your hand. How many of you like Christmas? Come on, raise your hand. You like Christmas time? I thought, I'd give y'all a little something to have joy about today. We're almost to the halfway point of Christmas. I looked it up. Today is 194 days till Christmas. Some of you are like, come on, let's get the Christmas tree and the decoration down today. Come on, we're doing it, right? I like Christmas. But what I like about Christmas? I know there's all the traditions and all the tree and all that kind of stuff. But what I think I like about it most? The pace. Because as you lead up to Christmas, it's busy and you're going to all the parties and all that kind of stuff. But somewhere around Christmas Eve, that evening, that afternoon, things slow down. And you wake up Christmas morning, of course, if you got little kids, they're waking you up and they're running in there, and Daddy, we got to open the presents or whatever. But then about 8:30 that morning, what do you got? Nothing. Where are you going? Nowhere, because there ain't nothing open. Come on, you know what I'm saying? And you know what you do? You make pancakes, or you have family traditions. You pull out the games, you play. At our house, we turn on George Strait Christmas cookies, and we dance. You know what I'm saying? And all the memories are made When? In the margin. When the pace is slow. What about vacation? How many like vacation? Come on. How many are going to take vacation this summer? I think this summer, probably people are going to take 5 vacations because they didn't get any last summer. All that pent up, demand for vacations, and I'm just already preparing myself for what that's going to be like for church. But I know you're going to be gone, and it's good because you got to have a pace where there's margin. You know what I love about vacation? When I get in the car with my family and we're headed on vacation, suddenly all my responsibilities, all my commitments, all that stuff, that's left behind me. And for the next week or however long we're going to be gone, like the pace is slow. And it's in that pace where we build those memories and those moments with our children. What if we could live our life at a sustainable pace? What if we could have more margin? In fact, it's in those margins that life begins to really actually make sense. I mean, think about it. If you maybe some of you are going to go into the beach on vacation this summer, and so you're going to sit around and read a book. Think about the margins in a book. If that book didn't have any margins, if it didn't have any at the top and on the sides, and if all the letters, there was no space between them, they were just all crammed together, the book wouldn't make any sense. And it wouldn't be very enjoyable to read. You try to read, it'd be frustrating, right? And some of us, our families and our lives, that's exactly what is happening. It makes no sense, and there's no joy, and it's frustrating because there's no margins in the sides and in the spaces of our life. And so we've got to slow down, and we got to prioritize. Yes, I should be committed to my church, and yes, I should be committed to my God. But does it mean I have to be committed to 17 different other things that are out there that are not as important as the things that will be life-giving and sustaining in my life? Come on. Do I want to have joy? Joy growing in my family? Then I got to have a safe place. I got to lead with a sustainable pace. But then notice this last one. And that is this. I got to fill my house with the spirit of grace. Notice our text again. Galatians 5:22. Notice what it says. The fruit of the what? Come on, everybody say it. Of the Spirit is joy. Notice this. It's not a fruit of the flesh. You don't get joy by yourself. And if you look at the circumstances and the stuff going on, you're not going to have much joy. The only way to have joy in your life and the only way to produce joy in the family that you lead, the only way is through the Spirit of God. It takes His grace. It takes giving grace to others. But more importantly than that, it takes receiving His grace. This fruit only grows when the Spirit of God is living inside of us. It reminds me of what the Apostle Paul said. He said, man, I'm blowing it. I'm weak. I don't have what it takes. I don't know what I'm going to do. Some of you may experience that in your life and in your family. But I love what God's response to him is in this passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Basically, he says, I'm weak and I'm falling short. But God said to me, but my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in your weakness. Guys, man, this last year and a half has been a lot. There are circumstances, some that don't even seem like they're getting better. But can I tell you, you can have joy even in the midst of the circumstances. You can have joy in your family. You can have joy in your marriage. You can have joy in the middle of difficulties. You can have joy even in your weakness. Why? Because His grace is enough. If His Spirit is living inside of you, it's supernatural. The fruit of joy. Not based on what you see. Not based on what you feel. I'll just be honest. This last 6 months or so have been really tough on me. Like we led through all of the pandemic stuff and it started to get better, and then I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been struggling emotionally. Been struggling because I look around and I don't see things happening the way that I want to see them happening. I don't see people come back to church like I want to see them coming back to church. I scroll through Facebook and I see people who do everything else, but I still hadn't seen them here. They're at the restaurant, they're at the movie, they're on vacation, they're all that. Oh, I can't come back to church. And it's weighed heavy on me, just to be honest. In fact, this last couple of weeks, I started praying this prayer. God, I'm struggling to have joy. I'm struggling to be struggling with my emotions and all these kind of things. And so I started praying, Lord, if I could just see a sign, if I could just see some signs, like if we could just see a few people start coming back to church, if we could see some people getting saved, if I could see the signs, if I could see the attendance being better, if I could see those signs, then I could be joyful, God. God spoke to me and said, you don't need signs because you have my Spirit. The fruit of joy is not a fruit of what you see around you. It's a fruit of what I am doing inside of you. Some of you are looking like, man, if I could see the signs of things getting better, then I could. And yes, we pray for those things. I still prayed all week long and do every week. God, let people come back to church. Let people get saved. Let all those things. But even if they don't, I can still have joy. Why? Because I have the Spirit of God living in me. It's the same for every single one of you sitting in this room today. No matter the circumstance, His grace is enough.
Thank you for joining us online today. Make sure and hit subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for more notifications. We can't wait to engage with you this week.